Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us tonight for this first in the series of lectures that will take place throughout the year of 2019. I'm not certain how many there are. I'm not certain when they will take place, but the information will be available on the website for the Institute of Archaeology, and please do check that. If you had an opportunity when you came in to the room today, to the reception, to sign up there, and even if you didn't, you could still do that before you leave, then information on any of the Institute of Archaeology's activities will be sent to you. Willeke Wendrick, whom you just saw in this lovely film, is the director of the Coatsen Institute. She's unable to be here with us this evening and sends you her greetings, but she's asked me to give you a little overview, if we have a little bit of time, into the activities of the Institute. Willeke is actually attending a meeting of the academic board of the Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy. It's noteworthy, actually, that UCLA is there, that she's representing this institute, since it's the only academic institutional member of the board. Other members include the British Museum and the Louvre. My name, as you can see so visibly up there, is Joanne Van Tilburg. I'm the director of the Rock Art Archive at the Coatsen Institute of Archaeology, but some of you may know me more in regard to my work on Easter Island. In any case, our interest in the archive is in ancient aesthetics, whether it happens to be rock art, sculpture, or other kinds of expressions of the human condition and the human heart. I'd like to ask you this evening to join me in welcoming to this evening one of the Coatsen visiting scholars, Marina Gagliano, who's here this evening. Where are you, Marina? She's back there. And also to point out to you, as you all probably very well know, private philanthropy is very, very important to UCLA, but also to the Institute of Archaeology, the Coatsen Institute. And the philanthropy that has enriched the experience of our students and everyone else here at the Institute of Archaeology has supported fieldwork, laboratory research, publications, and cutting-edge technologies. Special guests who are with us this evening who have been very, very active as supporters, not only in word and deed, but through their enthusiasm and their commitment to the preservation of the past, include Charlie Steinmetz, who's here. Where are you, Charlie? Harris Bass, who's with us. And David Boucheron. Where are you, David? Yes, all here. I'd also like to acknowledge my husband, Johannes Van Tilburg, who's here, who supports me. We also have with us tonight Michelle Jacobson, who's the Director of Development for the Coatsen Institute of Archaeology. Michelle, back there in the back. She is a fount of wisdom and information if you have any questions. And now I'd like to move to the introduction of our speaker for this evening. I was told that this would change things, but it doesn't. Doesn't matter where you are, these things don't work. Okay, can you do it? Attaboy. We did it. Yay, thank you. Our speaker this evening is a friend and colleague and dynamic speaker whom I know you will enjoy every second of her presentation. This is Dr. Carolyn Boyd. She's the Shumla Endowed Research Professor in the Department of Anthropology at Texas State University. She is also the founder, vice president of the Board of Directors, and ex officio head of a nonprofit organization known as the Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center. Established in 1998, Shumla works to preserve the rock art of the Lower Pecos Canyonlands of southwest Texas and collaborates, of course, with similar kinds of interest in northern Mexico. Closer to home, Carolyn and I are colleagues at the International Consortium of Rock Art Researchers known as the Rock Art Network, which is headed and was conceptualized and created by Dr. Neville Agnew of the Getty Conservation Center. Carolyn Boyd received her doctorate in archaeology from Texas A&M University. Her research focused on an analysis of the 4,000-year-old rock art of the Lower Pecos. She is author of Rock Art of the Lower Pecos, published in 2003 by Texas A&M University Press, and the White Shaman Mural, an enduring creation narrative, published in 2016 by the University of Texas Press. The latter book, by the way, received the 2017 Scholarly Book Award from the Society for American Archaeology. It's a very big deal. Carolyn Boyd teaches field methods in rock art, a 4-week field school offered through Texas State University. She lectures widely and internationally on her research and also on behalf of rock art conservation and community involvement in conservation. Currently, Carolyn Boyd also serves as research advisor for the Alexandria Project, the goal of which is to establish a geo-referenced graphic database of over 300 rock art sites in the Lower Pecos region. Carolyn, as I've already said, is a dynamic and informative speaker, and I'm sure you will find that she will awaken your interest in the topic of rock art. Please save your questions until after Carolyn has finished, because we do have enough time to follow up with the short Q&A session. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the Coates Institute of Archaeology, Dr. Carolyn Boyd.
Okay, let's see if I can make this work first before I do anything else. Okay. Hello. I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. Here, I'll let you do it. How about that? While he's doing that, I thank you very much, Joanne. Thank you so much to the Coates Institute for inviting me to be here today. It's working? Good. And am I turned on? That sounded strange. All right. It's wonderful to be here, and it's so fun. I've been seeing faces, familiar faces from Aurora and from the Rock Art Network, and it's just great to be here and to be reunited. I am going to be taking you to Texas. A lot of people don't realize that Texas has some of the finest rock art in the world. Actually, Dr. Jean Clot says that the rock art of the Lower Pecos is second to none in the world. But it's in Texas. Some great things are there. So what we're going to be talking about today is a site that I've been working on for over 25 years. It's a mural known as the White Shaman mural. It's one of at least 350 murals in just one county alone in Texas. It's the subject of my most recent book, The White Shaman Mural, an enduring creation narrative. So we're going to go deep into the book today, and hopefully after you've seen this, you're all going to want to go to Texas to visit the rock art. What I'll be talking to you about today are the patterns that we found in the rock art and how they equate in absolutely stunning detail to the myths and rituals of Uto-Aztecan-speaking peoples, particularly the ancient Aztec and even the contemporary Huichol. Through those patterns, what we've learned about this mural is that it's a visual narrative, not just a random collection of images painted over hundreds or thousands of years, but a single composition produced to communicate a story. And the story this mural tells is the story about the birth of the sun and the creation of time. The implications of this are great. What it tells us is that there is a shared ideological universe that was in place as far back as 4,000 years ago, and I would argue much, much longer, that was established among these foragers in the Lower Pecos and has endured through time. Because the same stories that are documented on the walls 4,000 years ago are being told today by the contemporary Huichol in Mexico. The site was named for this beautiful figure, named the White Shaman. Sadly, it is not, although it is white and it is an anthropomorphic figure, you will learn today that this figure is actually a lunar deity. The site is located right at almost the dead center of what we call the Lower Pecos Canyonlands, right at the confluence of the Pecos River with the Rio Grande. You can see here, this is Mexico, of course, south of the Rio Grande. The cultural area that we call the Lower Pecos cultural area extends down into Mexico. We're not sure how far, but we know it goes about 100 miles, more or less, that we're starting to find sites down further into this area. But it's the Pecos River, the Devil's River, and the Rio Grande. There are three rivers that come together, and this is where all the action takes place. This region has an incredible amount of rock shelters with archaeological deposits that go back as far as 13,000 years. This is Eagle Cave. The preservation is remarkable because these are dry rock shelters, never been wet, so you can pull sandals out of the ground that look like, you know, they're a year old, yet they're 4,000 or 5,000 years in age. But these are on both sides of the border, both in Texas and in Coahuila, Mexico. So one of the best preserved records of hunter-gatherer lifeways in all of North America. But what makes this area especially unique is the rock art. Painted on the walls of a lot of these rock shelters and along the canyons are magnificent murals that are referred to as the Pecos River style. We know of at least 300, 350 on the north side of the border, and there are likely as many or more on the south side of the border. And then there are hundreds that we've just not yet found. We're discovering new sites all the time. These have been radiocarbon dated from as far back as 2700 BC up to AD 600. And that means not just that's the range. It was actually produced for that long. This particular style was in production for 3,000 years. To give you a sense of where this fits in terms of what's going on in the world, it begins around the time of the beginning of the Old Kingdom with the Great Pyramids, and it stops sometime about when Islam arose. So that just gives you a sense of how much was happening around the world while this one rock art style was in production here in our country. It's characterized by these beautiful anthropomorphic figures that are painted in multiple colors, red, yellow, black, and white. This figure that you see here stands over 10 feet tall. So think big. It's Texas, right? This is lots of animals as well, particularly the feline and the deer are the two dominant animals. And then there's those enigmatic figures that don't fit neatly into either one of those two categories, but just as remarkable. They're big. This is Rattlesnake Canyon. It's 105 feet in length. Almost all of these murals required scaffolding. Think a lot of investment of labor for hunters and gatherers. So 105 feet. The site we're going to talk about today is small in comparison. The White Shaman mural is only 27 feet in length and about 13 feet in height. It's perched right at the top of a little canyon that overlooks the Pecos River and looks south down into Mexico. And this is actually Amistad Reservoir. Originally, the river was not that large. This is backed up from the creation of the reservoir. But the views from inside this shelter are stunning. It faces south-southwest. The paintings face due west. But when you're in this site, you see the sun set every single day. It's just beautiful. And it's a natural planetarium. That's Venus, by the way, that you can see here. It's a stunning, stunning place to be at night. I've been very fortunate to be there even for a lunar solar eclipse on the winter solstice, I'm sorry. Okay, so in terms of the date for this particular site, it's on the young end. It dates to somewhere between 400 BC and 400 AD. It was dated early when radiocarbon dating first started. We need to redate it. I'm a little nervous about that just from the standpoint of it's destructive. It's a destructive technique. But that's where it fits within the overall span of Pecos River style. Just to give you, too, a sense of where it fits with what's going on in Mexico. So it obviously starts, the Pecos River style starts much sooner than anything that we have in terms of, you know, knowing about the different civilizations down in Mexico. But it gives you a sense of where White Shaman mural fits, for example, with Teotihuacan. Okay, now we're going to get into it. So this is a 3D model of the White Shaman shelter. And at Shumla, the organization that I founded, we've been working to document the sites in the Lower Pecos. This is one of those that we've documented. And we have identified at this site 42 anthropomorphs, 6 zoomorphs, and 62 enigmatics. Each one of those figures has its own name. And it's kind of funny because you talk about them like, oh, A015 and Z002. But this particular figure is A015. They have their classification numbers. And each one of these figures is shot in with a total data station. Purpose being, if something happens and the site's lost, we know where that figure was regardless. Even if it's gone from the wall, we know where it was exactly in space. These are then integrated into the 3D models so that we can follow them and know where they are. And when you're dealing with thousands of them, believe me, that's important. We illustrate each one of these figures as well, and I'm a firm believer in this. Photography is great, but it cannot replace drawing or illustrating a figure. I always go back to the quote from Frederick Frank, I have learned that what I have not drawn, I have never really seen, and that is absolutely true, because you then touch literally with your eyes everything that the artist actually produced. So we've tried to reproduce them the same way that they did, layer by layer, color layer by color layer. But there's a trick. How do you know the order in which they apply the paint? That's a very complicated sequence. And the way that we do this is using a digital microscope. This is the one that you see here is a Dynalite. And with this, we are able to microscopically study the paint layers. And you can hold it up to the wall, and then it's connected via USB back to the laptop, which you see Mark Willis operating that. And we take pictures and then analyze the images at 50 power and at 200 power. And this then helps us to identify the sequence. Which went down first? The black, the red, the yellow, the white. We've done this in this particular mural at 197 locations, which is a lot of work, believe me. And what we have done with that data then is to enter that into a software program called Harris Matrix. And this is, when you're dealing with as much data as we are, if you don't have some way to manage this data, you're just going to get lost. And this has been a wonderful program for this purpose. What we found from this blew me away. I'm an artist as well as an archaeologist. I was an artist professionally before I went back to get my degree in archaeology. Actually, it was this site that caused me to go back to school to get my degree in archaeology. What we learned was at this particular location, over 99% of the figures follow a rule in which the black was applied first, followed by the red, and then the yellow, and then the white. This ended up creating literally a tapestry where figures are all woven together by virtue of following this particular rule. It was absolutely remarkable. When we figured this out, I'll never forget, I went home, I held on to the kitchen island, and I just cried. Because I knew as an artist how complicated this really was. So I'm going to show you kind of what it would have looked like the way that they would have done it, or at least the best that we can. So let's start by erasing the paintings, and then just watch as the layers start building up. pretty amazing. Foragers, hunter-gatherers, simple. This mural is 26 foot long, required scaffolding just like the others. We're finding that same rule at Rattlesnake Canyon, which is 105 feet. Think about it. The planning that had to go into something like that. This is a single composition, and nothing about it is arbitrary or random. Everything carries meaning, including the order in which the paint was applied. So how do we get at the meaning behind it? How do we get to know what these particular figures are about? And it all comes down to everything we look at in archaeology, which is patterns. And in this case, it's attribute patterns. And when I say attribute, I'm talking about those things that can be measured and observed. What color is it? What direction does it face? What kind of paraphernalia does it have? All of these types of pieces of information are significant clues to what this particular image and the others mean and how they're related to one another. So what we're doing at Shumla is collecting this data, and we collect over 100 pieces of attribute data for every figure. That then all gets entered into a database, a searchable database. And then you start looking for patterns across the landscape, patterns within a shelter, to start understanding how you can formulate hypotheses to explain those particular patterns. And that's what we did with this particular site. So as soon as I put this up on the screen, what did you do? Who is it? Are you Greek? Some of you might be. Were you alive when the myth first developed? How do you know that this is Medusa? You know, you read this by, there's nothing here that says Medusa. You read it visually. And that's what we were doing, or what we are doing, are looking at these visual attributes and reading those attributes informed by myth. And it's the same thing that you're doing when you were doing this. So for the people of the Pecos, the hunters and gatherers, when they saw this particular figure, they read it visually. And they saw this information, they processed this information, and they knew who this figure was. Just like you did when you saw Medusa. This was really driven home to me in August 2010 when I was visited by a Huichol shaman. I'd already made connections to this mural and to the rock art with the Huichol, but the Huichol had never come to the Lower Pecos. They'd never seen this site, so it was the first time. And we went in front of the panel, and Matsua stood there and wept. And he said, they're all here. All of my grandfathers, grandfathers, grandfathers. And this was done through translation from Huichol to Spanish to English. And he started pointing to them. Takutsi nakawe, kayumari. You can imagine my reaction at this point. How did he know? How could he have known? I was blown away. This happened again with Alfredo Lopez Austin. Some of you may be familiar with him. He is like the man when it comes to Mesoamerican mythology. I had already gotten the book accepted for publication by UT Press when I went to UNAM to lecture, and I presented essentially the presentation I'm giving you to him. And before I would even tell him what the different motifs represented, he was doing what the Huichol shaman did. And he would say, that's the sustenance rope. Well, have you thought about burning water? Have you thought about, and he goes through, and the next slide, it was just amazing. It was a remarkable experience. He was reading the mural because he knows the mythology. The Huichol shaman read the mural because he knows the mythology that's informing that particular panel. So Lopez Austin says the reason that this is happening is that despite all of these different aspects within Mesoamerican religions, you're going to find a kernel, a core, that's a hard nucleus that they all share. And this hard nucleus, he says, is extremely resistant to change. It's that shared ideological universe that I was telling you about. And he says that at some point, they must have all been together as a part of some kind of an archaic core. And it's the archaic core concepts that he identified, that we've identified in the archaic in the Lower Pecos. So when I started looking at the patterns drew me south. The patterns took me down to the ancient Aztec or the Nahua and to the Huichol. Those were where I found the strongest parallels between the patterns in the rock art and the mythology, were these particular ones, these particular groups. Now it's interesting, the most recent thing that's happened is that they're now doing DNA studies, and the DNA studies of the teeth have, as you can read here, found that the ancient Lower Pecos inhabitants are most closely related to the present-day indigenous populations in Mexico. I thought that was really very exciting and very interesting. So now we're going to get into the actual interpretive stuff. A lot of scholars have looked at and identified that there's really strong parallels between the Huichol and the Aztec. Actually, Huichol scholars and scholars of the ancient Nahua will tell you, if you want to understand what the ancient Nahua looked like, you should study first the Huichol. That's where to start. There's that much strong parallel. And what I'm going to do is to kind of give you a very abbreviated story related to the birth of the sun, because it's when you look at the birth of the sun for the Huichol and the birth of the sun for the ancient Nahua, it's very similar. I'm going to go through and do a very condensed form for the Huichol, and then we're going to get into the panel and actually start reading it. But believe me, this is condensed. So, the Huichol story of creation starts with, in the beginning, like all good stories should start, in the beginning, the world was in complete darkness. The only light that they had was the light of the moon. And the primordial ancestors lived in the dark waters of the underworld. And it was decided that they should leave and go and try to find the light, to find the place where there could be a sun, where the sun could be born. But none of them knew how to go. They didn't know where to go. One among them, the deer, said, I know how to get to where the sun will rise. I will follow the path of Kawi the caterpillar. So we have to pursue, we have to follow this path. And they said, well, but it's dark. How are we going to get there? And Grandfather Fire says, I will give you my firelight. And through my fire, you can find your way through the underworld. Pursue the deer, follow the deer through the underworld. And at the end of Kawi's path, you will find the sun. So they pursue the deer through the underworld with the fire given to them by Grandfather Fire. And when they get to the sacred homeland, to the land, to the place where the sun is going to rise, the deer turns and he recognizes that his ancestors, his primordial ancestors, his relatives are suffering, that they need sustenance. So he allows himself to be sacrificed. He kills himself so that they can have sustenance. And at that moment, when he allows himself to be slain, his body is transformed into peyote, the sacred cactus. And they eat the body of the deer, and when they eat the body of the deer, they themselves are transformed into the deities. And at that very moment, the sun rises. There's a parallel myth that goes along with this. At the same time that this is happening, there is a young boy who is deformed, and he's one of 5 that are involved in the process of trying to get the sun to be born. The first 4 try, that are supposed to sacrifice themselves, but they can't do it. They can't go through with it. And then the 5th boy, who's deformed, throws himself into the fire, and he travels through the 5 levels of the underworld, and he travels for 5 days, and he's accompanied by the other ancestors. He gets to the cave birthplace and emerges out of the top of the primordial mountain. And when he comes up out of the mountain, he gets to a certain point. He's about to be transformed into the sun, but what happens? He can't move any further. So the ancestors have to use the fire to encourage the sun to go ahead and rise. And so he goes ahead and he goes up, and then they have to use the candles in the four corners plus the center to keep the sun up in the sky so that it doesn't stay down and ultimately burn the earth. So this is basically the story that the Huichol tell. So let's go into the panel. We have 5 black anthropomorphic figures that extend the entire length of the mural. Each one is holding a black object with a red tip, and the heads of the anthropomorphs are also red. The Huichol go through a ritual to reenact this story that I just told you. And they do it every year, and they believe that if they don't do it, the world will cease to exist, that the sun won't rise. It's a big responsibility. So when they are reenacting this, they literally go back into primordial time. They're beginning as though it's never happened before. They're doing it for the first time. And they travel in single file as they make a journey from where they live in the states of Jalisco and Nayarit now to the land where the peyote grows, which is to the east. At different points along the way, they stop and they hold up candles to the ascending sun, just like what happened in the myth, where the 2 candles or where the fire is used to fuel the sunrise. And these particular figures, the pilgrims, when they do this, represent the major god ancestors that participated in that very first act of creation. They also represent stars because ultimately this is an astronomical event. They represent the stars that traveled through the underworld that were sacrificed when the sun rose. Because what happens when the sun rises? The stars are consumed and they go away. Now, let's look at some of the colors and things like that that are brought into it. Why are they black and red? Their bodies are black because primordial time is associated with the color black. People are believed to be born wet and cold and associated with what is feminine, what is dark, what is west. The pilgrims are associated with primordial time, so they would be that way. And stars are also associated with the color black because they're associated with night and with cold. Their heads are red, which is associated with heat and east and fire and masculinity, because they believe that the soul was placed in the head at the moment of conception or within the womb. And that's the knowledge of the ancestors. And that is very, very hot. As one goes through a spiritual transformation in life, you become hotter and drier, transforming the body, becoming more red. And of course, the torches would be black with the red tip. It's a union of masculine and feminine that gives birth to the sun. And 5, why 5? 5 represents completion and perfection. And when they do this reenactment of this pilgrimage, the 5 primordial ancestors, the original 5, must be present when they do the reenactment. 5 also represents the 5 directions, the 4 corners plus the center, and it represents the 5 pillars or torches that uphold the sky. Because remember, they had to put those in place so that the sun would not fall. Okay, so then we go to the Aztec. That was basically the synopsis of the Huichol. The Aztec story of the birth of the sun, very similarly, they had the 5 ancestors that came together. They were all supposed to be involved in this sacrifice. The first 4 tried, remember, and they flaked out. Nobody could do it. Nana Watson, number 5, the deformed deity covered with pustules, threw himself into the fire, and he traveled through the underworld. Then he emerged at the place where the sun was supposed to rise, but he didn't keep going. Does anybody know what happens? He gets in a battle. He really ticks Venus off, the Lord of Dawn, because he won't move. So, Tlazhuilcalpantecutli, I should never try to say that. I don't speak Nahua. The Venus, the Lord of Dawn, gets into a battle with the sun, and shoots the sun, doesn't win. The sun shoots Venus. Venus loses, right? And then the other gods come into play. The others that were involved in this process sacrifice themselves. The other gods sacrifice their hearts to fuel the sun. And with that sacrifice from the gods, the sun rises. But the pillars, the sky bearers, were put into place to make sure that the heavens stay where they're supposed to be. Very similar to the story of the Huichol. So their new fire ceremony was conducted every 52 years to reenact the story of the birth of the sun. And when they do this, the fire priests that are involved in it, painted black in penance, same idea. Black denotes them both as stellar beings and that they've been marked as for sacrifice. These fire priests become God impersonators. They become the gods that were a part of that original story, just like with the Huichol. And they make the pilgrimage, they make the journey up to the Hill of the Star, where a fire is drilled in the chest of the sacrificial victim. If anybody's ever made fire, using friction fire, I always think, how in the world did they do that in the chest cavity and be successful? I just don't get it. But I haven't experimented with anybody. So anyway, so once they get the fire lit, then the fire torches are lit from the fire, and the fire is carried to the temple of the sun and then out to all the different directions. And again, remember the story is that the pillars are put into place to hold the sun in the heavens. So our figures that we've got, our 5 black figures with the torches, represent multiple things. They are stars. They are stellar ancestors. They represent the 5 directions. They represent the 5 fiery sky bearers who prevent the heavens from falling to earth. But it doesn't stop there. We have a white line that extends the entire length of the mural until it turns to black right at the very first figure on this end. These 5 figures are all connected, and it was the last thing that was added. For the Huichol, when they're reenacting this story or this event of the birth of the sun, one of the rituals they go through is one in which the shaman takes a fresh cactus fiber cord out of his pouch, and they all are instructed to hold this cord. This binds them together as sacred, as a one unit. It represents the path. Remember Kawi, the caterpillar? It represents the path that they follow to the hill in the east, the path that the ancestors walked. It represents the path of the sun along the ecliptic. It also represents a metaphorical umbilical cord that binds them together and unites them as one stellar sacrifice through the sharing of their divine essence. In Mesoamerica, these sinuous sky ropes and white cotton cords are often used to indicate a cord of men or a rope of people that binds them together, binds human to divine and human to human. And it served as a channel also for feeding blood sacrifices to the sun through that umbilical cord. Ours are connected by virtue of that white cord. It also served as the ecliptic, as you can see in this from the Codex Borgia, where the white cord is here, and this is the deer carrying the sun along the ecliptic. Well, if that's the case and that is the path, then we should find the primordial mountain at the end of the path. At the end of Kawi's path, we should find the primordial mountain. And that's exactly what we find here. We have this serpentine arch that you see here, and it's sandwiched between the white and the black line. And this motif represents very much the Huichol effigy of Dawn Mountain, the place where the sun rises. It is an effigy of the primordial mountain, and we're all, of course, familiar with things like the recreation of primordial mountains through the architecture, for example, of the Temple of the Sun at Teotihuacan, which represents the stairways for the sun, and at the top represents the axis mundi, that intersection point between this world and the underworld. So here we have it at the end of the white cord. We've got this motif. Part of it we've lost to spalling. But so it originally, there would have been 6 on this side, 6 on this side. And interestingly, if you go to the Aztec, the way that they count this for the temples of the sun and so forth, we have 6 steps on one side, 6 on the other. The top represents number 13 to represent the 13 divisions of daylight and the 13 levels of heaven. So there's the possibility that we might have some numerology involved. Remember, nothing is arbitrary or random. Everything carries meaning. So we better pay attention to the numbers as well. Interesting thing happens at this site on the equinox at sunset. You can see it's illuminated here with this. The sun literally climbs the steps of this motif on the equinox. It's a really wonderful thing to watch. Well, if this is the east, what do you expect to find over there? Everybody can contribute. This is east, that's excellent. Well, let's see. This is the motif we have over in the west. And if we go back into the numerology again, we find something interesting. For the Aztec, east is associated with the number 13. West is associated with the number 9. This motif has 6 lobes across the top, 3 across the bottom, making a total of 9. So again, we might be seeing some numerology come into play in this case. I can tell you that when the Huichol shaman came to the site, I had not yet identified this motif. He went to this and he said, this is, he called it the ocean, which is the entrance into the underworld in the west. So that was like, wow, cool. So, both for the Nahua and for the Aztec, when they reenact the creation story, the participants become the gods. They actually become the deities that were involved in the birth of the sun. In the White Shaman mural, each one of our primordial ancestors, the ones that are black, are connected via some kind of an artistic convention to another figure, which represents their deity avatar. And that's what we're going to go into now, is looking at the actual deities that were involved in the creation story. We're going to start with the very first one. This is the one that's associated with that crenellated arch that we've already identified as the Dawn Mountain or the Primordial Mountain. And we have emerging from it this lovely little figure with, it's got yellow centipede-like figures associated with its left arm. It has an atlatl loaded with a dart, black mask, and it has 9 antler tines. They're tipped with black dots. So we're going to look at this. I will not show you another one of these, but I just wanted to show you the process. So each one of these are the attributes, remember we talked about. These are the corresponding analogs, and this is where they're present or not present within the Aztec or the Nahua. And you can see there's a lot of parallels. There's only a couple of places where we don't have an explanation within the Huichol, but we do with the Nahua. In other words, there were even stronger parallels with the Nahua than there were with the Huichol. So let's look at these. When the pilgrims make their journey, when they recreate that original story, the event, the person that leads the Huichol pilgrims takes on the identity of the deer, the sacred deer. He carries the antler rack of the sacred deer, the one that guided them through the underworld. He actually becomes that deer. He carries the weapon that will slay the deer. You get this? He is both the sacrifice and the sacrificer. He is going to kill himself. He's both predator and prey. His deity avatar is both the deer, the fire, and the sun. The fire god for the Huichol is the one who brings the ancestors up from the underworld. That should sound familiar for anybody who is familiar with Aztec mythology. But he brings the ancestors up from the underworld. You can see them here. This is the ancestors, the heart, soul of the ancestors, deer, water, stars attached to the antlers of the god coming up from the underworld. His antlers are believed to be his flames, and he consumed the sacrifice and fueled the sun's birth. And he himself serves as the axis mundi and exists in all three levels of the cosmos simultaneously. The only one who does that. The artists of this panel were so ingenious because they actually painted that into this, that he exists in all three levels. They started with black, remember? And then red, and then yellow. He is sandwiched into this motif, literally as though he is emerging from the primordial mountain, and then last, the white line. Stunning. For the Aztec, their fire god also dwells at the center of the cosmos, as you can see here. And let's look at some other parallels that we have with him. He has the atlatl, the spear thrower that's used to slay the stars at dawn to fuel sunrise and to put time into motion, as is our figure. Our figure has these yellow centipede-like images associated with it. And interestingly, in Mesoamerica, centipedes are associated with the newly born sun, the coming rains, and emergence from the underworld. So a very appropriate place for this motif to actually appear in the mural. For the Huichol, they actually paint on their faces a yellow image of a centipede to indicate that they have had an encounter with the rising sun at the primordial mountain and their sacred homeland. But it's his antlers that give him away the most. For both Xuticutli, the fire god, and for Tatewari, the Huichol fire god, his antlers represent his flames in both cases, the flames of the fire god. And flames are going to be red because they are associated with heat and fire. But there's something else. Remember, we talked about numerology, and we have to pay attention to it. There are 9 antler tines. Now, my experience with the artists of these murals is they paid a lot of attention to symmetry. So why did they break the rule? Why did they not do 8? Why did they do 9? Maybe it's related to this. The fire god Xuticutli is the patron of the 9th day, which is associated with water. And he is the one that brought the water up from the underworld. So maybe, just maybe, that's what this is about. We'll see. But what about the black dots? Why in the world would they put, and remember, they didn't put black dots on the red antlers. They painted the black dots and then the red antlers. None of you would do it that way, I can promise you. Well, this is a beautiful Huichol yarn painting that really kind of summarizes it. They believe that within the antlers of the deer, contained in the antlers of the deer, is the water, it's the heart souls of the ancestors, it's the stars, it is that which through fiery sacrifice will become peyote and the sun. That's all contained in the antlers. All of these are associated with the first 3. What color? Black. So they're located on the fiery antlers brought up from the underworld. According, again, black is the color of water and femininity. That's the way it started. And then the fire. For the Aztec, this is a beautiful quote that says, all that exists on earth is the result of the active penetration of these 2 opposed elements, fire and water. It's the union of the fire and the water that gave birth to the sun. Well, if it if that's what we're talking about, and this is the right location, this is Primordial Mountain, and that's the fire god who transforms and becomes the sun god, then what should we find nearby? In the Huichol myth, the deer is sacrificed or sacrifices himself so that the sun can be born. In the Aztec story, there's a battle that takes place between the Lord of Dawn, Venus, who is associated with the deer, and the sun slays Venus, right? So we should find some indication of a slain deer in this nearby proximity. What do we have immediately above this motif but an impaled deer? And this is not just any old impaled deer. Remember, black painted before red, this figure has 12 black dots in its body. I used to not be a believer in paying attention to the little minutiae of things like numbers until now. Because guess who is ruler of the 12th day? The Lord of Dawn. The one who's slain by the sun at the birth of the sun. 12 black dots. Okay, still we could say it's just a chance. Maybe this is just not really real. So let's look at the next. Oh, this one's my favorite. One of my favorites. I guess I like them all. But really, look at this crazy figure. This is associated with the second pilgrim. This figure has 2 sets of antler racks, 16 tines, wings and tail feather, and a funny little toothed hole down right there. Interesting. For the Huichol, when they do the pilgrimage, the pilgrim that has to be right behind the god of fire, or to his left, has to be great-grandfather Deertail, who is master of the deer. He's an avatar of the fire god. He has attributes of both a hawk and a deer, and he is a Venusian deity, representing both evening star and morning star, black and red. Evening star is associated with black, and morning star with red. So that's the Huichol. For the Aztec, and I didn't figure this out until well into the work that I was doing, there's the master or mistress of the deer, if you would like, is a Venusian deity, whose nawa is the deer, associated with 2 heads, 2-headed deer, associated with the eagle. She's a fire goddess. And guess what she is associated with? She consumes the stars at dawn with her vagina dentata. And what is this? Looks like a toothed vagina to me. I started to not put that in there thinking maybe there'll be kids in the audience, but I think we're okay. This is Itzpapalotl. And guess who is patron of the 16th day? She has 16 tines, and she is 16. So we've got the 13 lobes on the crenellated arch. We've got the 9 on the thing in the west. We've got the 9 antler tines. We've got you see what I'm saying? We've got a pattern developing here that is very strong. Okay, third pilgrim we're going to go through real fast. Beautiful figure, painted in 4 colors, 2-headed, 3 appendages, circles at the junctures that you can see here. These are the 3 appendages. You got red, yellow, black, and white. For the Huichol, one of the deities that has to be present is Grandmother Growth, and she is both in her earth aspect and her moon aspect, has to be on the pilgrimage. In her earth aspect, she demands images of herself, which are images of something that's a conflation of a serpent and a catfish. She's associated with the color of the 4 directions. She's associated with water and fertility and serpents, and the 3-legged drum that you see here. Many of those same things if we're talking about the Aztec, but I wanted to add one thing. She's also, for the Aztec, the one who swallows the solar deity. Now I want you to see that our figure here's mouth is resting right along the ecliptic, which means as the sun moves along the ecliptic, It could be swallowed by the earth goddess at this location. The moon aspect also has to be present on the Huichol pilgrimage, and that's who we have here. She is portrayed, the one that, remember, that's referred to as the White Shaman. She's headless with a red band at her neck that you can see up here. She's holding red and black S-shaped paraphernalia. She has red S-shaped lines that go down her white body. For the Huichol, the moon goddess is also associated with the water, but the water of the west, fertility, rain, and serpents. She's identified with the color white, and S-shaped offerings, dough cakes, formed in the shape of S, are offered to try and bring rain. And she demands effigies of a single man in a canoe because she was responsible for saving humanity from the flood. For the Aztec, lunar deities are associated with fertility, rain, and serpents. They are also identified with the color white, and they are also associated with having saved humanity from the flood. They're also decapitated, such as you see here. And they are also associated with the S-shaped curves or the S-shaped motif, which is called the Shonakawili, which is lightning and rain and cloud and serpents. And Nawa and Mixtec moon deities' regalia is decorated with the Shonakawili. But like I said, both believe that the lunar deities are in some way responsible for saving humanity from the flood by placing them in a canoe or some kind of a craft. Well, look what we have right below her. A single man in a canoe or something. Just amazing. According to Milbrath, the artist of the Borgia Codex painted a red band at the neck to indicate where a head was going to be severed. If that's the case, this would be the place where the head would be severed, right? Well, on the winter solstice sunset, watch what happens. The sun moves up the panel until it gets to this location. And right at that point, the head is severed. It's almost like they drew this while during the sunset. It is that perfect. It is precise where the red band is. And of course, we know why she'd be decapitated on the winter solstice sunset, because it's at that point the moon loses control because the days are going to start getting longer again. So the sun takes over. Just amazing. All right, we're almost to the end. Our fifth pilgrim. If we've got the rising sun, who's our only figure that's missing? The setting sun. So look who's going down. This is the first of these to be a downward-facing figure. Impaled, falling down is the next figure, who has this beautiful yellow disc around its face with a black center mask. And this figure is very similar to the Huichol concept of the god of the setting sun. He's the assistant to Father Sun, he's the patron of the deer hunt, and he snares the deer, which is Venus, that's needed to lead the sun through the underworld at night. So this is the deer snare that you see around his head here. Well, this figure has a lot of parallels to none other than Tezcatlipoca, the night sun, with his solar disk, the solar disk of Tezcatlipoca, with the black obsidian mirror, which is what we have here. But there's more than that. This figure has 13 of these L shapes that go all the way around. And gosh, I could go on and on and on about this, but we don't have time. These 13 L shapes, I believe, represent either fire drills or the reeds loaded in atlatls. Regardless, that would have been the reeds that would have been used in either one. Tezcatlipoca is the patron of the 13th day sign reed, and 13 reed if that's what these are, is the year for both the Nahua and the Maya associated with the birth of the sun. So the story goes for the Aztec, just like with the Huichol. At dusk, the sun sets into the land of black and red, which is what we have right here. The motif we identified is associated with the west and number 9. But he's accompanied by the evening star, who I think this figure right here is. And why do I think that? He has this 5-pronged comb painted over the top of him. And in Aztec Venus iconography, 5 radiating elements allude to the 5-ness of Venus implicit in the Venus almanac 5 synodic periods. And this is the symbol, one of the symbols used to denote 5 associated with this figure. And it even gets better. It says the night sun will travel through the Earth's body at night before emerging at dawn, and Venus, the deer, will travel with him. Well, let's see what happens in this particular spot. This figure has these kind of look like cattails that are falling away from it, and these transform into this figure here that's an upside down impaled deer. Venus is believed to transform into the deer in the belly of the underworld, and then carries the sun through the underworld, which is what you have right here. So this is at the White Shaman, and this is the sun on the back of the deer going along the ecliptic. Same idea, where the deer carries the sun through the underworld. So if we go to the mural, we have the sun traveling through the underworld. It rises at the primordial mountain. It slays Venus, travels across the sky, and it sets again at sunset into the land of black and red. And I scratched the surface. You got to read the book for the rest of it. There's so much more, and we are learning more about it all the time. Somebody asked me once, well, is it finished? No way. This panel will be studied for generations to come. There is still so much to learn from this particular mural. We've just only begun, but what we do know is it is a narrative. It is telling, and it may be the oldest pictorial creation narrative in North America, but it's telling us an incredible story that's still told today. It is an ancient manuscript, just like the codices. It's no less important. Just because it was produced by hunter-gatherers does not make it any less important than something produced by the Aztec, right? Right. We're all going to say right. It's absolutely as important. You know, something I have said so many times over, this has been a learning experience for me beyond what I can ever express. I never thought I would learn as much as I have, and I know that we have still so much more. But with knowledge comes responsibility. Now I know, now you know, that these are books, essentially. Some of the oldest known books in North America. If someone was to come up to you and they handed you an ancient manuscript and they said, here, this is the oldest book in North America. Here, take it. What are you going to do with it? Take care of it. That's our responsibility now. We must take care of it. This is our responsibility. You know now we need to protect these, and we are losing them. The creation of Amistad Reservoir increased the humidity, and we are losing them at a rapid rate. Wind farm industrialization, right now, we are fighting with everything we've got. They're putting in 18,000 right around this site. The damage is just horrible. Nobody would do that if it was a book. But because it's on a wall produced by hunters and gatherers, too often they're overlooked. So we are working at Shumla to preserve them. The Alexandria Project is named for the Alexandria Library. That library was destroyed. It had the finest information on botany, astronomy, mythology of the time, and it burned in 48 BC. We don't have to lose the North American Archaic Library, but we have to preserve it. We have to document it. So we are working around the clock to do just that. And I hope that you will go to this website, learn more about the project that we're doing, support the project through your gifts or your time, and help us to preserve these ancient manuscripts before they're lost. Thank you.